Okay, if you've just joined, nice to have you. Good evening. We're in chapter 3. The third chapter of Tanya is the one that starts to talk to us about how our neshama operates. So that's what we're going to focus on. How does the soul work? And one of the things that we have identified, a very important thing, and that's what we're trying to work out over here, is that the soul is comprised of 10 soul powers, 10 components. And then those 10 components themselves are divided into two groups, what we call seichel and midos. So the soul is comprised of an intellectual segment and a so-called emotional or a subjective segment. So those are the two parts. And at this stage of the game, we're trying to understand the nature of the intellectual segment of the soul. Remember, we're talking about the nefesh elikis here. We're talking about the godly soul. So much of what we'll discuss is obviously very unique and specific to the godly soul. The godly soul doesn't use its mind, doesn't use its intellect to work out how can I make a buck, or how can I become famous, or how can I get from point A to point B. The nature of the divine soul, the nefesh elikis, is that it's always looking for an opportunity for connection with Hashem. So if it's going to use this whole developed intellectual range, it's going to use it to find ways in order to be able to connect to Hashem. Now, one of the key factors that we're going to speak about, and that is like an underpinning of the whole concept of Chabad, is that if you use your mind, it helps you to be able to connect to Hashem. Because ultimately, you know how people are. The way that we are designed, the way that we are wired, is we relate to things that we can see, that we can touch, that we can smell, that we can experience, right? Isn't that the case? So for example, if somebody had to tell us about a particular restaurant, I went to this restaurant and the food was really good and whatever the case is, so we could get excited about it and we say, you know what, I understand what that is, and I understand what restaurants are, and I understand what good food is. So give me the details. When is it open? How do I get there? What is the price range? Do you have to book in advance? And then I'll go and I'll enjoy the restaurant because it's something that I could relate to. The idea of eating is something which is very close, low-hanging fruit for the human experience. But if somebody tells you, you really should connect to Hashem because it's going to be very meaningful, say, I don't know what that is. Haven't had it before. Have you ever had it before? I don't know what it looks like. I don't know what it tastes like. I don't know what it feels like. So the only access point that we have to develop a meaningful excitement, because that's what we want. We want to get to a point where we're excited. We want to be stimulated. We want to feel that we're drawn in order to have this relationship with Hashem. So in order to do that, I've got to get my head working. I've got to understand what is Hashem. So up until this point, we've described the fact that there are twins, what we call a mother and father, two components of the intellect that have to work together in order for a person to reach that excitement, that enthusiasm, to say, I want to connect to Hashem. What are the two facets? What are the two aspects? We call them Av V'Eim, father and mother, otherwise known as Chochmah and Bina. And up until this point in time, we've described what Chochmah is, and we've begun to describe what Bina is. And this evening, we're going to say, so how do you get it? How do you really get it when you're learning about something so abstract? Here we are. We're talking about God, which is a wonderful theoretical principle. But how do you make Hashem real to you? It's the story that they tell. You have to remember that in the early days of the Hasidic movement, there was a tremendous pushback from the rest of the religious community against Hasidim. Very strong pushback. And it split families at times, and people were hounded, and people were sometimes even physically attacked. So if you were somebody who got involved in the Hasidic movement, and you had other members of your family or community who did not approve, it could have become and at times it did become a very uncomfortable place to be. So in the early days, they tell a story that the Alter Rebbe himself, the author of the Tanya, he had family who did not approve of his engagement with the Hasidim. In those days, they used to call it the cult. Can you imagine? Imagine coming home to a Jewish parent and saying, your child is involved in the cult. Can you imagine the fallout? In any event, So in this case, the Alter Rebbe had married at a very young age. The tradition in those days was that a person would marry in their teens, and then they would go to study in yeshiva, supported by the father-in-law for a period of time. And that's what he did as well. When he went off to study, much to his father-in-law's disappointment, instead of going to study in the massive, beautiful yeshivas of Vilna, that was known as the great seat of Talmudic knowledge, he went off instead to Mezrich to study with the cult, with the Hasidim. And this didn't find favor in his father-in-law's eyes, and there were a lot of scuffles back and forth. It wasn't a very pleasant experience. On one particular occasion, the father-in-law was so riled up, he was so annoyed about this, he says, "So tell me something. What is it that you learned? What did you learn that is so spectacular, that you find so attractive about the Hasidic yeshiva, that you could not have found in the great Talmudic halls of Vilna? What did you learn?" So he said, "I learned that there is a God." Well, as you can well imagine, that wasn't necessarily the answer that his father-in-law had expected. And he was furious. And he said, "What, you learned that there's a God? That's what you learned?" And he called over, they had a woman who helped them in the house, a Russian peasant woman. He called her over, whatever her name was, Maria, whatever. "Maria, who created the heavens and the earth?" She says, "Boga, God." So the father-in-law says, "You see, she didn't go to any yeshivas, and she could tell you just like that, off the cuff, that God created the heavens and the earth. You had to go and spend all this time and create all this friction in our family to find out that there's a God?" So to that, Alter Rebbe replied, "Sie sagt, ich weiß." She says that there's a God, and I know that there's a God. If you have a look at the beginning of the Rambam's 14-volume Yad HaChazaka, the Mishnah Torah, his magnum opus, the encyclopedia of Jewish law that completely revolutionized the whole of Judaism, you look at the opening paragraph. What does he say? Yesoid HaYesoidos, the foundation that underpins all foundations. Va'amud HaChochmos, and the pillar that supports all wisdom. Leida sheyesh sham motzei rishon, is to know that there is an original primary existence, otherwise known as God. He does not say leha'amin, to believe. He says leida, to know. The challenge of being Jewish is that there are many believers in this world, from all strokes, all paths, all religions. And that's great. And that's wonderful. And we encourage it. Because needless to say, if a person has belief in God, they will live differently. They will treat other people differently. They will have a sense of higher authority. They'll keep their behavior in check. It's a wonderful thing. It's one of the underpinnings of the whole morality of society. But it's not good enough for a Jewish person. Belief in God for us is not an achievement. Belief in God for us is in our DNA. As the Gemara says, that the nature of the Jewish people is to be ma'aminim b'nei ma'aminim. Believers, the children of believers. But I've already believed that the modern version of saying that is believers who have belief in their DNA. That's what it means. Children of believers. We didn't learn it in a book. We didn't go to Sunday school and they brainwashed us to have belief in God. It's just part and parcel of who we are. It's inescapable for us. It's the mother's milk of the Jewish experience. So there's no mitzvah for a Jewish person to believe in God. That's a given. That's assumed. That's why Jews behave in such strange ways. That at the same time that the Jewish person is so busy rebelling against his Judaism, he still acknowledges God. Or as the Gemara puts it, the robber who's breaking into a house, and as he's about to jimmy the lock, he pauses for a minute and he says, "Please Hashem, help me that I should not get caught." Because it's inescapable. This belief in Hashem that we have, it is in our DNA. What is the mitzvah? The mitzvah, as the verse says, is da es Elokei avicha, to know God. The Rambam lists in his mitzvahs, no mitzvah to believe in God, a mitzvah to know God. So how do you come to know God? How do I know anything in life? From experience, actually. How do you know, for example, that at a certain time of the year you need to put sunscreen on your skin? How do you know? Because you've been sunburned. That's why, have you ever noticed there's this running debate between children and mothers about at which point you have to put on a sweater, right? It's this running debate. Mothers are forever telling their children, it's cold outside, you have to put a top. And the kids are forever saying, I'm not cold. Why? Because it's abstract information. Because those kids are running at 400 miles an hour, so they don't cool off as quickly as the rest of us. And then eventually there comes a time where the child gets cold. Either feels cold or, God forbid, catches a cold. And at that point, experientially, now you realize there's such a thing. You have to dress warmly when it's winter. That's the nature of people. We're not so good at relating to things from a theoretical vantage point. We're very good at relating to things because we've had first-hand experience. And that's why we use cliches like, there is no better teacher than experience. So how does it work if you're told, Da es Elokei avicha, to know God? How are you supposed to come to know God? How? What's the experience that you're going to have? So people always sit back and say, Hashem, hit me with your best shot. If, the whole if-when principle of faith, the if-when principle of faith basically goes like this. If God will do this to me, then I'll commit myself. If he'll show me a miracle, then I'll become religious. If he'll sort out my problems, then I'll do a mitzvah. Because that's the nature of people. If I know that it's real, if I've experienced it firsthand, if I can touch it, smell it, experience it, taste it, then it's real. But we're supposed to be, as the Torah calls us, Am Chacham V'Novoin, which literally means a wise and understanding nation. But now that we are familiar with language, and we know that there is an intellectual component of the soul called Chokhmah, and another one called Bina, then we get it, Am Chacham V'Novoin. We are a nation who puts these two intellectual powers together. We create a partnership between the innovative openness of Chokhmah and the focused research of Bina, and we use them together in order to reach a point that we can know Hashem. So that's what we're going to look at this evening. What are you supposed to think about? What are you supposed to meditate on to achieve this sense of, I know God? I don't just say God, I know God. So what are the tools in our arsenal? What can we use in order to facilitate that experience? This is what the Alter Rebbe will now teach us. And then at the end of the chapter, he'll teach us how even that is not enough, and we need to be able to go beyond just so-called theoretical knowledge. So, he's going to teach us 3 layers of meditation. Because when we describe the intellect within the soul's capacity for intelligence, in simple English, when you use your brain, so what should a Jewish person use the brain for? Mizboinein umamik me'oid b'gedulas Hashem. So let's unpack these 3 words. Number 1, we are required lehisboinein, which means to contemplate. Number 2, we are required laha'amik, which means to delve deeply into something. Thirdly, both of those are supposed to be me'oid, in a superlative way. What are we supposed to contemplate on? B'gedulas Hashem, Hashem's greatness. Okay, so now we have to understand, first of all, let's unpack these 3 terms. And immediately we'll realize that these three terms actually describe three different kinds of meditation that we're supposed to use. And the word meditation is perhaps a little bit unfamiliar to us in the Jewish world, because when you think of meditation, you think of somebody sitting in the lotus position with their mantra. And the truth is that Jewish meditation is quite different. It's very intellectual. And that's why a better word is hisboinenus, which is contemplation. So the first thing that he describes is hisboinenus, to be able to contemplate an idea. Then he says not just to contemplate, but ma'amik, to go deeply, and then ma'oid, to an extreme. So if you think of it, life as we know it operates in three dimensions. And those three dimensions are what we call length, breadth, and depth. Spiritually, there are also three dimensions, and we access those three dimensions through three types of meditation: length, breadth, and depth. The entire reality of hisboinenus, which is the power of bina. Remember, we said last time that bina is related to the word boineh, which means to build. So if you want to construct something and you want it to be stable, you need it to be three-dimensional. I mean, you can easily design something in two dimensions, and it could actually look very realistic. But the bottom line is it won't be stable. Once something is 3D, then it is stable. And it's exactly the same thing when it comes to understanding. If you really want to understand something properly, you have to understand it in 3D. So how do you understand a concept in 3D? You need length, breadth, and depth. So which is the easiest to access? Breadth. If you had to talk about somebody and say, wow, they have such a breadth of knowledge, what are you trying to say? What do we mean when we say a breadth of knowledge? You know what we're trying to say? Google. That's what we're trying to say. A breadth of knowledge means you know many, many, many facts or many, many, many details about a particular fact. That's breadth. So if somebody is a so-called expert in a particular area, they can quote all the different statistics, they can tell you the background behind it, they can tell you the case studies, they can tell you what it will mean in practice. You know, somebody gets up and they're the big expert on COVID. Okay, then you expect it. They're going to tell you exactly what organs it affects and how it is spread and what kind of molecules it uses and how big the droplets are and what kind of distance you have to have between people to keep safe and what kind of prophylactic treatment does work and what's hogwash, and what kind of things should you do if a person, God forbid, gets sick. That's what you would expect. Breadth. Tremendous amount of information. Now, if I'm working from a chokhmah seminal position to a bina developed position, typically the first thing I'm going to do is increase breadth. You can even actually see this in Hebrew letters, because the Hebrew letter that is supposed to represent chokhmah is the smallest letter in the alphabet, the tiny little yud. And actually, if you think about it, a yud is essentially just a dot on a page. I mean, in a Torah scroll, it's got to be very perfectly formed, and it has to have the exact angles and the points. But the bottom line is it's a nekuda. It's a dot. Every other letter that we produce calligraphically, so when you watch the beautiful safros, the scribe using the calligraphy of writing a Torah, what you'll see is every letter is very precise, and every letter starts as a yud. Have you ever watched a scribe write a Torah? That's how it is. Every letter starts as a yud, and then it gets drawn out and down into the various shapes. So here's a question. So somebody just asked, why is Chokhmah represented by yud? Because as we learned 2 weeks ago, we learned that Chokhmah is a seed. Chokhmah is the spark, the generation and germination of a new idea. And therefore it's represented by the letter Yud, which is the smallest of the letters to imply something which is just a spark, just a seed, not yet developed. There is another reason too, and that is because Yud is always a letter used to represent Hashem's name. And I mean, it is, after all, the first letter of Hashem's name. And as we described, Chokhmah is the ability that somebody has to let go of self, to surrender, to submit, which opens them up to godliness. So there's the Yud connection again. It's the ability to connect to Hashem. How do I connect to Hashem? I shrink myself down into the smallest possible state that I could be in, and that opens me up for connection. Now, if we take Hashem's name, the next letter in the name is a Hey. And I think this will address the next question also about why not a letter Ches. Right? So What's the next letter in Hashem's name? A hey. How do you make a hey? You take the yud, and the first thing you do is you give it breadth. That's how you write a hey. You start at the top. Next time somebody's writing a Torah in a shul near you, go peer over the shoulder of the scribe. It's beautiful to watch. So you'll see, we start with that yud, and the motion is horizontal, left to right, making breadth. That's the first step of a hey. Hey is the letter that represents bina. It's the letter that represents expansion and research and understanding and developing an idea. So the first step to developing an idea is more information. So let's say, for argument's sake, you've got a brilliant idea. We're not talking now necessarily about the nefesh elokis, about the divine soul. Let's just talk generally in the academic process, the intellectual process. So you've got a brilliant idea, right? You have now come up with the ultimate idea. What's the ultimate idea? I don't know. I'm sure many people have their thoughts on what the ultimate idea is. But let's say that you have come up with an idea to save people from their smartphones. Okay, this is it. You are going to now change the world. You have found a way to save people from their smartphones. So it's a great idea. And whatever the idea is of how you're going to do it, just germinate it in your mind. The very first thing that you need to do is collect more information. So find out, why is it that people are so compelled to keep looking at that verstunkene screen? Here they are, face to face with somebody who ostensibly they care about, and yet there they look at the screen again. Why? So you do the research and you find out more information. You get the statistics. How many people feel that their relationship is interrupted by the smartphone? You do your research on what do the people who develop this technology do right to make it so compelling. So you build a whole case. You gather as much information as you possibly can. The next step, so you take this hey, you've created a horizontal bar. What is the next move that you do in the drawing of the letter hey? Down. So you get to the edge, and now you go downwards. Downwards is what we call length. That's called length. Why length? Now, it's very interesting because most people, unfortunately, don't ever think about thinking. We just do it because it's something natural, but we don't actually analyze, and we don't take apart the intellectual process to examine its various components so we actually understand how it works. What is the second step or the second process in intellect? And so many people, because they don't understand the components of intellect, so many people miss this point. It's called oirech, length. So now if breadth is moving horizontally, breadth means I take an idea that I already have in my head, and in my head I expand it. So now I have more information in my head. You know what the problem is with having information in your own head? You assume that other people can see what's in your head. And so when you start to talk as it is in your head. The poor audience has absolutely no idea what's going on in your head. And you get frustrated with them. Don't you see what I'm trying to tell you? They get frustrated with you because you're talking absolute nonsense, and there is no communication between us. So that's the kind of thing that plays out probably in living rooms all over the world every single night. There's some conversation that goes something along the lines of, didn't you X? I thought I told you. You didn't tell me. Right? Those kinds of things. Why? Because we live inside our own minds. We develop a whole idea inside our own minds. And then we kind of just assume that the minute we present that idea to somebody else, they're going to get it just like this. We forget that it took us time to reach that point. We forget that we created a whole binyan, a whole building in our minds. So what is oirech? It's like the fireman pole. Get the stuff from up there as it is in your mind and bring it down into a reality either that could relate to other people or that they could understand, or that relates to practicality. There are many people running around who have beautiful ideas, tremendous amount of information, no relationship to the real world. You know these people? You ever met them? They have amazing academic abstract ideas that have no bearing on reality. And they don't get it. They don't see that. They don't see the chasm between how they understand it and how things operate in the real world. So oirech, length, is the process of translating ideas from abstraction into pragmatism. What does it really mean? So this would be the question we have to ask ourselves. What does this really mean? You speak to some of these people who are like business coaches, motivational speakers. They often say, what the problem is? People have these brilliant ideas, but they don't know what to do with that, right? They don't know what to do with the idea. They don't know how to make it real. So one of the things that they recommend to people is make for yourself clear objectives. Tell it to yourself. What is the objective? What does this mean? So the person who says, I am going to start a multi-million-dollar company, that's great. What does it mean? What does the company look like? What does it produce? I have a friend whose his entire business is built on assisting people who are startups to actually get themselves over the finish line. Because you know what they say? 90% of all startups fail. So what's the reason that they fail? One of the reasons, I was talking to him about it the other day, he says one of the reasons that startups fail is because they have a brilliant idea, but they have absolutely no reality check of whether that idea is even needed. So you've got a great idea, but if nobody needs your idea, it's brilliant. So you've got to bring that oirech, you've got to bring it down, test it in the real world. Now let's talk for a moment about the Nefesh Elokis, because that's the focus of this shiur, right, of this chapter. This is the divine soul at work. This is the intellectual processing of the divine soul. So it starts with Chokhmah. What does it mean starts with Chokhmah? It means this. I go to a shiur, or I open up a book, or I listen to a lecture online, or whatever the case is, and I hear a concept. Let's just say, for argument's sake, that the concept that I hear is that Hashem is so great that creation is actually not a compliment for him. In my world, if I could create something, it would be a huge compliment. Certainly if I could create something, even a fraction of this earth, let alone the entire universe. In Hashem's reality, creation is an insult, actually. If you had to turn around and say, Hashem, you are great because you've created the world, that would actually be demeaning. So I hear this concept and I'm like, wow. Okay, Chokhmah, you've just blown my mind. Up until this point in time, I thought that the greatest accolade that we could give to God was Baruch she'omar v'haya ha'olam. Blessed is he who spoke and the world came into existence. I always thought creator with a capital C was his job description. Now you're telling me that could actually be inappropriate. To refer to Hashem as creator could actually be insulting. Whoa, this is mind-blowing stuff. Chokhmah, something's happened. I've just had this flash of realization that everything I've thought up until this point in time may be misguided, but I don't know what to do with this information. So I come home and I told my family, guys, God is not the creator. Okay, well, that would be a problem. That would be getting the Chokhmah and completely missing the point of what the Chokhmah is about. But that's what we do. It's exactly what we do. We come home, we've got a brand new idea, flash, inspiration. I read this in a book, I heard it from somebody else. We don't give ourselves an opportunity to unpack it, and then we make these broad statements like, this is what they said. I always love it because, people come over at the end of shul, and they say, Rabbi, I really loved what you said about da-da-da. And I'm like, but I didn't say that. Yeah, but you said in yours, Josh, I did not say that. Or better yet, months down the line, people come back and say, that time that you spoke about X and you said whatever changed my perspective. And I'm like, I really don't think I said that. I might have been something similar, but that's not, because what happens is we get stuck in the Chokhmah stage and we don't pause to unpack. So to unpack would mean hisboinanus. What's hisboinanus? First of all, leharchiv, to broaden the horizon. What exactly do we mean when we say creator? Before we speak about whether or not it's complementary to Hashem, what do we mean when we say creator? You can go onto YouTube and you can have a YouTube account, and with your YouTube account you get a creator studio. So you're also a creator. What does creator mean? Let's broaden the horizon a little bit. So I need to stop and think, what does my world contain? How amazingly calibrated is it? Look at the seasons, look at the plants, look at the animal life, look at the ecosystems that exist, look at the perfect balance of where our Earth is in the solar system to be the only planet that can sustain life. That's what it means to be a creator. Let's just broaden this. Let's not just use terminology, throw away labels. Let's actually understand it. And then I say, now that I appreciate what it means for Hashem to create, now I need to bring it down into tangible terms that I could relate to. Why would I say that it might not be a compliment to Hashem to call him creator? Why not? What am I trying to express? What am I trying to convey by using that expression? Bring it down, make it real. That's the second phase of hisbonenus, taking ideas out of their abstraction and trying to understand what they mean in terms that are relatable, in terms that I could almost see and touch. Remember, we're experiential people. So the more vivid it is, the more I'll connect with the idea. As long as we keep parroting information, as we tend to do, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. The Lord is our God, the Lord is one. That is Chokhmah. Even if we've said it 1,000,000 times, it could still only be Chokhmah. So now we stop when we come to the Shema. And we are misboinen. We ask ourselves, why does it say Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem? Why? I need more information. Why is this the language? It sounds repetitive. Why is the one name of Hashem spelled Yud Kei Vav Kei and the other name of Hashem is spelled Aleph Lamed Hey Yud Mem? And why do we say Elokeinu, our God? Let's pause. Let's express. Let's research this. Let's meditate on it. What's it telling me? How's it relevant in my life? What does it mean to me? Here's bringing it down, length. What does it mean to me if Hashem is our God? How would that impact my life? What difference should it make if I speak about God in the third person or if I speak about God in the possessive? Why do we say echad? Why is that the word? Maybe we should have used the word yochid, which means the only. Why do we say echad, one, which almost implies the possibility of 2 and 3 and the whole number line? So that's hisbonenus. Trying to create a 3D perspective on an idea that just flew through my mind and I haven't paid it a second glance. And then the third, now here's what's beautiful about this. Remember, when you look at a letter on paper, you're obviously only able to see it in 2 dimensions, right? But what if the letters are 3D? Have you ever thought about that? What if the letters are 3D? So you've got the Hey, which is a horizontal bar representing breadth, and a vertical bar representing length, and then it's got the broken leg on the other side. And we always think of that little piece of the Hey as a broken leg that doesn't reach the top, and that's valid. And there are many insights that we learn from the letter Hey and the fact that it's got the broken leg. But who says it's broken? Maybe that's the 3-dimensional part of the letter. Maybe that's the part of the letter that continues into the paper and converges with the horizon. So that's why I can't see its full extent, because I'm only looking at 2 dimensions. But if I would look deeper, I would discover that there's a whole picture which does not initially meet the eye. The third step of meditation, of contemplation, of bina. What is the depth of the message? Not only how is the message relatable, but what is the depth? And you know what happens when you start to plumb the depth of a message? You actually never end. Because just when you think that you've really got this, you discover that there's another layer. And that layer opens a whole rabbit hole, and you go into a whole new world. That's depth. Depth is what allows us to keep returning to the same information and recontemplating it again and again. It's the exact opposite of Chokhmah. Chokhmah, once you've had a good idea, you can never have the good idea again. That idea has been used. When you hear information for the first time, you can never hear it for the first time again, by definition. Chokhmah, by its definition, is transient, it is short-term, it is a spark that then fizzles. Bina has the potential to take you to depth where it never ends. And so theoretically, I'm not recommending that this is necessarily how we do things, but theoretically, you could take one concept in Torah, one chokhmah, and spend your life on it. Because not collecting new and more information, because eventually you'll get to a point where you feel, I've collected enough information. And not to translate it into real life terms multiple times, because once I've got it in real life terms, I've got it in real life terms. But depth. Depth continues infinitely. That's why we keep reading the same Torah portions every single year. Because every single year when you arrive back at the parasha, you should find depth in that parasha that you never even thought to look for. Why do we daven again and again and again every single day? So people will tell you, because we always need things from God and we always have things to be grateful for. That's true. But then we should only say the parts that are asking for what we need or thanking for what we have. You could shave the davening down to a fraction of its length. Why is it that every single day we proclaim twice a day, even 3 times a day, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad? What are we trying to find? New information? No. We're trying to find new depth. And we'll do this again and again as long as we live. Because that is the nature of his boinanus. To keep going and going. So what is his boinanus? He tells us. Misboinein, the first is to create a nice picture with a lot of information and make the information relatable. Then ma'amek, then you go deep. And then you go ma'oid. Ma'oid is a powerful word that is completely underrated in Hebrew. Because people will tell you, what is ma'oid in Hebrew? A lot. It's underrated. What do we say in the Shema? You should love Hashem your God. Bechol levavcha, with all of the dimensions of your heart. That's why it's a plural word. Uvechol nafshecha, and with all of your soul. Uvechol me'oidecha. And all of the English translations battle with that phrase. And they tell you, Bechol moidecha, with all your might. And if you've got a more contemporary translation, it might even say with all your possessions, which is based on the Gemara. But what are we really trying to say? Think about it. You've reached a point where you say, I am going to love Hashem with my whole heart and my whole soul. What is there beyond that? Please tell me. What? You've reached max. What more can you do? I'm going to love Hashem with all my soul. What more do you want? No, I want ma'oid. What's ma'oid? And ma'oidecha, it's a possessive phrase. Your ma'oid. What does that mean? So every one of us is, by nature, designed to operate in a particular fashion. Every one of us. And none of us has the same fashion in which we operate. So, for example, some people, by nature, are very cautious. Everything gets overthought. Everything gets analyzed. You get 14 different opinions. You'd never, God forbid, invest in Bitcoin. Because we're very cautious people. Other people, the exact opposite. Free-spirited, go with the flow, whatever happens, trust the process, open yourself up to the universe, or as we would say, open yourself up to Hashem. Magnanimous, give people the time of day, trust people. Totally different perspectives. And the way that we live our lives differently is always a function of nafshecha, of the soul. One person's soul is created and wired in such a way that they're a very cautious kind of, with restrained person, and the other person's soul is open soul. And those are only two examples. We appreciate, obviously, that there are thousands of examples. What's ma'oid? Ma'oid is something that for you feels like, wow, that's a lot. So if you've got somebody who by nature is very reticent, very measured, it could be that for them to do something outside of their comfort zone, for them to push themselves to be more trusting, more open, more accepting, that's their ma'oid. And if you've got somebody who's so open and, happy-go-lucky, embracing, tolerant, could be that their ma'oid is to learn how to have some discipline. When it comes to love of Hashem, every one of us is willing to love Hashem within the framework of our reality. I will love Hashem. You know how I will love Hashem? I'm going to go to every single shir that I could possibly find. Why? Because that's how I'm wired. I'm the kind of person who enjoys learning Torah. That speaks to me. It enriches me. It fills me. That's how I'm going to express my love to God. Another person will tell you, I'm going to express my love to God. You know how I'm going to express my love to God? I am going to go out there and help every person that I can find who is going through difficulty. I'm going to give of myself, give of my time, give of my assets. That's me. And that's how I'm going to show my love of God. And the next person, I'm going to love God because I'm going to meditate on the davening every single day for a number of hours at a time. Me'oidecha means that you push yourself. So the person who enjoys learning goes out to help people as well. The person who enjoys helping people makes sure to learn as well. But not just to kind of say, I've done it, I've fulfilled and discharged my obligation. Me'oid. You throw yourself into something that is completely beyond yourself. When it comes to trying to understand Hashem, because remember, we're experiential people. We don't relate well to what is abstract. It's got to be vivid for us. It's got to be tangible for us, and then we'll feel connected. So therefore, we need to be mizboinen. We need to use the intellectual process of contemplation. Umamek, and we have to go deep into that contemplation. And me'oid, we have to go totally beyond anything that we expected, understood, or preconceived. And then we start to get connection to Hashem. Now you're talking. Because ultimately, if you think about it, the human mind is finite, God is infinite. You cannot get to an infinite entity using a finite tool. So Ma'oid is the infinite tool. Ma'oid is the moment where I say, I'm going to allow myself to consider things that are completely, don't understand them. So what the Alter Rebbe will do for us is he'll offer us 3 different meditations, 3 different concepts for us to contemplate on, so that we can get through those 3 stages of Mizboinen and Ma'amik and Me'oid. So he's actually going to give us tools that we could use, but we don't have nearly enough time now to begin to unpack those tools. So I'll just tell you what they're called, and then please God, next week we'll start to unpack them. The first is the consideration of Memale Kol Almin, that Hashem fills the world. The second is a meditation on Soivev Kol Almin, that Hashem encompasses all of the worlds. And the third is the meditation that Kula Kamei Kelochshiv, that everything compared to Hashem has no worth. So those are the 3 levels of contemplation, which please God we'll pick up next week. I'm just going to address, I don't know if it was put as a question or not. Rabbi Kiva said when they tortured and killed, now he said yes. He said, now I understand what it means to serve Hashem. The Gemara says there, B'chol nafshecha, he said, with all your soul, because he interpreted to mean, afilu noitel es nafshecha, even if they take your soul, take your life, you'll still love Hashem at that point in time anyway. Okay, so please God, to be continued. Does anybody have any questions?